Hello, I'm Matthew Weinstock, Managing Editor of Modern Healthcare. Thanks for tuning in to the latest edition of The Checkup. Calls for the healthcare industry to continue to innovate and disrupt itself from within are undoubtedly going to grow as we start thinking about a post-pandemic environment, whenever that may be. Portland, Oregon-based Cambia Health Solutions has, for the past couple decades, certainly been out in front of the rest of the industry when it comes to creating a really diverse and innovative portfolio of companies and products. The insurer has built a technology and venture capital arms, for instance, and it's done a lot more. I'm pleased to be joined today by Cambia CEO Mark Ganz, who is actually retiring at the end of the year. But we're going to talk through some of the ways that the industry can and really must continue to innovate and disrupt itself, which I know is one of Mark holds near to his heart. So, Mark, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Matthew. It's good to be with you.
So let's start with that idea of sustaining, creating innovation and disruption, which you've been at Cambia since 2003. It's something you've done a lot of. But if you could put it in context for the audience, how do you sustain that momentum in the middle of a pandemic when you're focused on obviously patients, but also financial troubles, whatever's happening in Washington in terms of a relief package? Surge upon surge of caseloads. Is there a way to sustain innovation during this time?
Yeah, we have had very little difficulty in so doing. And I attribute it to two main things. We have a clarity about our vision and what we are trying to accomplish as a company. And that's something that I'm proud to say that the vision we put in place in 2003 when I became CEO is still the vision and the cause that we pursue. And the second element, aside from vision, has been culture. That the old aphorism that culture will eat strategy any day of the week is very true. And so one of the things that I have focused on in my leadership of the company has been making sure that we attend to and transform the culture inside the company. So that it went from what I would call a well-running bureaucracy, very much about rules making, rules enforcing, and rules following, to one that transformed into an innovation culture where you think about what rules can we don't break the golden rule, and we don't break the key critical ethical all of that. But in terms of what I call the rules of policy and procedure, we should be challenging those every day, because there's always, a consumer needs change, technology changes. And if you allow a company to kind of get set in its ways, it's a recipe for a company ultimately going out of business. And you think about some of the great companies when you and I were growing up that are no longer in existence at all. And it's not because they were bad companies. It was that they were too invested in their old way of doing business, and the world changed around them and they didn't. So I've really focused there. And I think that when you have the culture and you have the clarity of vision, things like even a global pandemic don't stop you. You just simply think, okay, how can we innovate through this? Because this is a huge issue for the people we serve. And how can we make sure we're there for them? And that we see the opportunity to move the entire industry in ways that you probably couldn't do in a steady state environment.
And are there things, Mark, as you think about, you've had that culture and we're hit with the pandemic, are there one or two things that have come up over the past 9-10 months that you can point to and say, boy, it's because our culture, we were able to do this?
Yeah. We made more decisions in the first couple of months of the pandemic than probably we would normally make in a year to 2 years. And it was really something to watch, how the team came together and how quickly we were able to make decisions that were consumer focused, that were about the people that we serve. And we just kind of had it in our DNA to think about be able to kind of walk in their shoes, think about what are they going through? What is going to be most important to them at a time like this? What are the fears they're dealing with? I mean, I myself had a personal issue where I think I had COVID back in late February, early March. I think I contracted it down at actually a meeting of hospital executives down in San Diego. And turned out that the disease was pretty rampant in Southern California, probably all the way through January and February, and nobody knew it. Well, I think I got it. Of course, there was no testing capacity in Oregon at the time, so I guess I'll never know for sure. But it was certainly an unusual illness that I'd never experienced. And I dealt with some anxiety myself. It gave me at least a personal sense of, okay, we've really got to get at this. And then, for example, we came to the early conclusion, before it was really being widely talked about, that not only do we have a pandemic upon us, we have an epidemic in the mental health world coming upon us, from all of the isolation, the loneliness, the anxiety that people were dealing with. And so we saw that as not only an important area to focus on here, right now, and try to do what we could to help people understand what was going on inside them and get help when they needed it and how to manage it. And Dr. Jim Polo has just been remarkable on our team in terms of the amount of time he has spent out in the community talking about this and trying to help, with real practical suggestions. But we also see this as a huge strategic opportunity for healthcare. I've always been struck by, when I became CEO, that healthcare was primarily about the physicality. It was the physical medicine. It was, when you got sick, how can we cure you? And too often, the issues of the mind and the issues of the spirit were not attended to. The issues of the mind were kind of like, oh, you're over there. That's that mental health thing, and that's like a separate silo, and we're going to do that differently. And there was a lot of stigma attached to it. Issues of the spirit were hardly dealt with, and that's one of the reasons why we became, I guess, we didn't intend to be a pioneer, but I guess we've been called a pioneer in the work that we've done in palliative care. That really is about. It's not about end of life. It's about dealing with a person's spirit and their family during the course of an illness or in the wake of an injury. And it should happen side by side with the curative physical care they're getting. But we also know that even as you're going through physical challenges, there are mental challenges that come with that: depression and again, isolation. So my dream and my belief is that, 10, 15 years from now, healthcare will finally get it right in understanding that you have to deal with the physical, the mental, and the spiritual all at the same time and with the same level of respect and investment and care. And I see this as a huge opportunity, Matthew, coming out of this pandemic.
Yeah, it's hard to find a silver lining in the pandemic, but that may be one where we finally start to see that the brain is part of the body.
Yeah.
But I'll also ask you, part of the challenge has always been that, mental health parity, while there is the rule of law that insurers have to have parity there, some of it comes back on the insurer community of not providing as much parity for mental health care as they do physical health care. So how do you get the payer community to come on board with what you're talking about?
I would disagree with that premise.
Okay.
I think the learning from mental health parity and the fact that mental health care is very difficult to obtain, is the fundamental mistake we make in this country, that's saying that if we pay for it, then people will have access. That's just not true. I don't know why we have to keep learning that lesson over and over again, and why it's not better understood that what we need to focus on is the competency of the care and the availability of the providers to do it. It is not a sufficient way to deal with mental health to go to your primary care doctor and be given a pill. So often it is about the issues are complicated. You need real professionals who understand and can counsel people and work with them and talk with them and listen to them. And then maybe a drug can be augmentative, but to say that that's it, just give me a drug and I'll be fine. They're not fine. So I think that we don't have enough mental health providers. We do not have enough of that kind of capacity. Now, I do think that telehealth, what we've seen has been one of I think the heaviest use of telehealth in our experience during this pandemic has been mental health telehealth.
Right.
And I think that is very exciting, because when you think about one of the reasons that I think it's 60% of people with mental health issues never get treatment. Yeah. That's what Dr. Polo told me. Yep. And I think a lot of it is that people are a little nervous about getting in their car and going to a clinic and worried that somebody might see and recognize their car, or they might run into somebody, because there still is that stigma around mental health. If they can do it with telehealth and can have a high quality engagement with a psychiatrist or a psychologist and do that in the comfort of their own home, I think it's a breakthrough. I think that may actually be the welcoming door, if you will, to a lot of people receiving care in a different way and actually getting the help they need, and not just getting a pill. And so I think that mental health parity, it did create parity in payment. But what we're finding is it shouldn't have been a surprise, is that it wasn't the cure-all. It wasn't right. The panacea. It's the same thing with palliative care. It's why when we invest into palliative care, we made direct investments into the palliative care community, into the workforce development. And that's where our best work has been, because we did bring in, and we've been told as our health insurance companies have the most advanced payment methodologies for palliative care, and I'm proud of that. But we didn't start there, because we knew that if you just pay for it and there's no competence or a low level of competence and availability, people will figure out how to get the payment. It doesn't mean that individuals and families are going to be better cared for. So I think we have the same opportunity with mental health to get it in the right sequence. And that's where we're strategically focusing our energies as a company, because we are paying for it, but we know that's not the answer.
But so are there investments, as you did in palliative care, that you're looking at to potentially do in the mental health care?
We're already doing it in the foundation, and that's where we started with palliative care. We're trying to develop the same kind of network of expertise by, so that our investments are well placed, that we're actually providing it where it's most needed, and how it's most needed. And so we're in that quick learning mode and experimentation mode to do it right. But I see the same opportunity, and I know that Jared Short, who will succeed me, he and I have had many conversations. He's on fire about this. He understands that there just isn't enough capability yet built into the system, and we want to be a catalyst to help that happen.
How long do you think? I think you said 8 to 10 years, but how can we shorten that time frame, or do you think it really takes a decade to build this up to where mental health care is really fully integrated into regular health, into all of healthcare?
Well, I think, I go back to culture, Matt. Culture changes slowly because people have to change their beliefs, and then they have to change their habits to go with their beliefs. And a lot of this, in terms of a really turning the corner on mental health, is overcoming people's reticence about getting treatment because of the stigma. And so to overcome the stigma, that will take some time. I do think that the availability and workforce issues may come a little bit sooner. But again, I think you have to change culture in medical schools and residency programs so that those who may be attracted to serving in the mental health environment don't feel like second-class citizens, that they feel like that's a great undertaking to take on, and that it attracts more people to that. So I think that's why I put that a little bit further out, just because I think there's a cultural change in the workforce development. There's cultural change in just Americans' beliefs about mental health. And no great work of art happened, overnight, right? We have to learn. I think Malcolm Gladwell talked about, the 10,000 hours of that it takes to be an overnight success. And I think there's America has to put in, the healthcare system has to put their 10,000 hours in on mental health care. But I do think the ball's rolling. I really do think that this pandemic has created an urgency about it, and I'm excited about that.
Great. Lastly, Mark, in the last minute we've got here, the other area that I think the pandemic may have created some urgency is the idea of, and you've sort of alluded to it, but shifting the payment model, right? So away from the widget mentality we have to more of a global or capitated world. Do you see that catching on now in wider swaths than we've seen heretofore?
Well, it depends on how you define it. I think a lot of the global payment or value-based payment, those kinds of words, in some ways, they're a new brand on a warmed over old model that didn't work the first time. All you have to do is look at healthcare inflation over the same period of time that capitated payments have been in place and the like, and you have to say it has not worked. And it is not a fair thing to say, oh, but it would have been so much worse if we hadn't had it. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And I think that I don't think most Americans would buy that. They're feeling more and more pain in their pocketbook, and we need a different model. So I think that there are certain constructs of value-based payments that I believe in and we have implemented. But even those, I think, are in the nature of innovation. I mean, we're finding out whether or not they work, but intuitively it would tell us that maybe they will. I think that if there's going to be a revolution coming out of this, it will be the one that I'm more excited about is the focus on the individual. We need to get away from this talk about population health. That's a very distancing and kind of, where you can talk about a population like it's out there, and you can wax poetic about, how we just need to get them to do what we think they ought to do. I think the pandemic has shown that you don't get people to do what you want by telling them what to do. You can't act like you're smarter than the people you serve. And so I think that the real opportunity here is a greater degree of personalization. Healthcare professionals, I think, and institutions need to do a better job of listening to individuals and then being able to curate an experience that's unique to them, to their cultural background. I mean, you want to overcome health inequities. I think you have to start by listening and really understanding and personalizing the approach. And I think I actually think the combination of the pandemic and then the awfulness that we all saw, of the killings of Black Americans, I think that combination could be a very powerful force because I don't toward health equity, and I don't think you get to health equity unless you are more focused on personalization, because you're different than I am. And you can't say that every Black American is the same. They're not.
Yep.
And so healthcare needs to be much more curious about individuals and families. And I think that the message is coming across. And I think this whole notion of healthcare needing to be more on our terms, as opposed to having to bow at the altar of the institutions of healthcare and follow their rules, got to flip it. And I think that's very exciting. Will payment have something to do with that? Yes, it will. But I wouldn't start there. And we're not starting there.
Right.
We're starting with the experience. And then I think the payment solutions will become more clear to us, and they'll more likely actually fuel acceleration toward innovation in that area.
Right. Well, those are some great topics, Mark, and some themes that we've heard across the checkup. We could go on for quite a while here. We limit these to about 15 minutes. So we really, as always, appreciate all of your insights. There's some really good stuff there. We wish you the best in your retirement.
It's only next chapter, Matthew. I'm not really retiring. I'm just retiring from a long career with a company.
Okay. Well, best of luck on the next chapter, and please stay safe, and Happy New Year. And
same to you. Have a great holiday. Bye-bye.
Thanks. And I'm Matthew Weinstock with Modern Healthcare. Be sure to come back next Monday for another edition of the Checkup.